New Deal in banking, the bank holiday, they shut down all the banks and went around and examined them all for 4 days and said, okay, Bank A is healthy, it can open right back up. Bank B needs a little bit of help, it can open up probably in a month. Bank C, deader than a doornail, it can never open again. Okay. Part of the New Deal in banking was to pass the FDIC, which guarantees your bank account so that if you had a savings account, you didn't lose all your money in it just because the bank went under, the government guaranteed. Keynesian economics, the idea that in times of depression, the government spends money, goes into debt, spending money to create jobs, stimulate the economy, do whatever is necessary, because that way the economy doesn't tank. In times of good times, according to Keynes, the government should stop spending money, because if it does continue to spend money, it causes inflation and debt. Francis Townsend, the doctor in California who suggested the government pay anybody over 60 not to work $200 a month, which they had to spend. And his idea meant that there would be more jobs for younger people, and that there would be this money going into the economy every month, which would stimulate job growth, they hoped. Did this become a reality? No. It's not a bad idea, actually, but it never became reality. What did the NIRA do? National Industrial Recovery Administration, I think is what it stands for, was aimed at setting up regulation and rules for business and industry. So you have a company that makes tires, and you want to sell your tires for $1 a tire instead of $10 a tire to undercut all the business. According to the NIRA, you couldn't do it. They set a minimum price for tires. Okay? The NIRA set a minimum wage you could pay your workers, all those kinds of things. Almost like the old-fashioned guilds of the Middle Ages. Eventually the NRA was declared unconstitutional. Okay? The AAA was the Agricultural Adjustment Act. The first New Deal one was declared unconstitutional too. It paid farmers not to grow crops. But because it placed a tax on food, that's why it was declared unconstitutional. The second AAA just paid farmers not to grow crops. Farming did not recover during the Depression. Why? Because mostly of the Dust Bowl, the drought that went through from Texas all the way up to North Dakota. Schechter versus the United States did what? It overturned the first New Deal, and Roosevelt's response to that was, of course, court packing, which means he suggested that for every Supreme Court justice over the age of 70, he got to appoint another one, up to 15 total justices. So what that would do would be get rid of all the conservative justices on the court. He thought that the Americans would go along with it, but Americans were appalled because that's smacked of tyranny to them. And so he dropped the issue, and then suddenly all the Supreme Court justices started dying or retiring, and by the time 1944 rolls around and he's being elected, he's appointed all 9 justices to the Supreme Court anyway. Huey Long and our Share Our Wealth plan, Huey Long was a senator, and his plan was to provide every American with a house, free college if they wanted, a chicken in the pot, and a car in the driveway. And the idea was the government would pay for all of this by confiscating anything that your fortune was more than $5 million. And each year, if you made more than $1 million, you paid 100% tax on anything over $1 million. So if you made $2 million, you paid the second $1 million just to the government totally, and then you paid taxes on the first $1 million. His idea went nowhere fast. It was viewed as being totally socialism. And Americans, did Americans really in 1930 think the government should take care of them? No. They blamed themselves for not having jobs and grudgingly accepted works or WPA jobs or PWA jobs. It was PWA first and then WPA. Which was deported in the largest numbers in the 1930s? Irish, Filipinos, Japanese, Chinese, or Mexicans? Mexicans, and it was called repatriation. Remember this from that chapter? Okay. A. Philip Randolph and the March on Washington. A. Philip Randolph was an African American who was the head of the Porters Union, and he said to Roosevelt, if you don't include blacks in the New Deal programs, we will march on Washington. So there was a section of the TVA dedicated to blacks, men working. The CCC, which employed young men, had a section for African American men. African American rights or advancements in the 1930s. True or false? Jackie Robinson played baseball?
True.
No, 1947. Bad. Jackie Robinson was a kid in the 30s. Did the AFL let them in? No. Did the New Deal provide a lot of help? No, just some help. Did blacks switch to the Democratic Party? Yes. 1932 election, most blacks still voted for Hoover. By 1936 election, 75% of blacks had switched from the Republican Party to the Democratic Party because they believed that the Democrats at least were attempting to help them with some New Deal programs. Why did blacks move to the Democratic Party? Because it was Lincoln's party? No. Because they feared the KKK? No. Because the New Deal gave blacks some economic opportunity? Yes. Because Roosevelt was strong on civil rights? Not particularly. Scottsboro boys, the Alabama boys who were arrested for raping 2 white women who they found out later were known prostitutes. They were all sentenced to death in the original trial. Then they get a new trial. Their lawyers are from the Communist Party. Eventually, by 1952, all 9 of them got out of jail, and none of them were killed, but it just shows the prejudice of the South. Scottsboro boys were arrested in Scottsboro, Alabama. Indian Reorganization Act of 1934 did what? It restored tribal authority over, communal lands or lands held together. Took away some of the power of the Bureau of Indian Affairs over them. Okay, let's stop there and we'll pick up with National Labor Relations Act tomorrow. Towards the dates, National Labor Relations Act, Wagner Act, are we all there?
Yes.
Okay, the National Labor Relations Act or the Wagner Act did what? Well, first and foremost, it established the principle of closed shop. And closed shop means that you have to belong to the union to work in the factory or whatever. Okay? The second thing it did was set up the idea of collective bargaining. That we send Johnson in to bargain for all of us, and he comes up with the best possible salary for us each, for all of us as a group. Okay? The National Labor Relations Act was overturned by, eventually, what piece of legislation did away with closed shop? Taft-Hartley Act. Okay, so for about 15 years, you have the Wagner Act being the way labor is treated, and then the Taft-Hartley Act is passed in the late 40s, and suddenly labor goes back to more restrictions like they were used to. Sit-down strike started in the 1930s, a new way of striking, so instead of standing outside the plant with your little sign and picketing, and then the company can hire scab labor to come in and work your job. You go to work like you're going to work, and then you sit down on the job, and so they can't bring in somebody to replace you because you're already occupying the machine or whatever the case might be. They were used very effectively with some car companies in Flint, Michigan. After a while, I think companies kind of became wise to workers doing this kind of thing.